forests are peaceful, until the silence is broken by something that should not be there. Tonight, we'll hear 4 terrifying true stories from campers who never looked at the woods the same way again. Story 1. Number 1. The Whispering Pines. When you picture camping, you probably imagine the smell of pine trees, the crackle of a fire, and the peaceful sound of crickets. But the group of friends in this story, they'll never picture the woods that way again. It was late September, a Friday evening, when 4 college friends, Josh, Emily, Ryan, and Chloe, decided to take one last camping trip before the weather turned cold. They picked a remote forest in northern Oregon, a place Josh's uncle had once recommended. According to him, it was quiet, beautiful, and untouched, perfect for a weekend escape. They drove 3 hours out of Portland, down winding roads that got narrower and darker with every mile. By the time they pulled up to the trailhead, the sun was dipping below the tree line, bathing the forest in an eerie orange glow. They loaded up their backpacks, grabbed their tent, and started the mile-long hike to a clearing Josh had marked on his phone. None of them noticed how strangely silent the woods were. No birdsong, no rustling leaves, just the crunch of their boots on the dirt path. By the time they reached the clearing, the sky was black. The only light came from their headlamps and the stars above. They set up the tent, started a fire, and roasted hot dogs they'd brought along. For a while, everything felt normal, but then Emily cocked her head. "Do you guys hear that?" she asked. The others fell silent. At first, they didn't hear anything. And then, faintly, through the trees, came a sound like someone whispering. Not words they could make out, just soft, breathy murmurs. Ryan laughed it off. "Probably the wind," he said. Even though the air was completely still, they brushed it aside and tried to enjoy the fire. But the unease lingered. Around midnight, they crawled into the tent. The fire outside had burned down to glowing embers. For a while, everything was fine. But then Josh woke up. At first he wasn't sure why. Then he realized he was hearing the whispers again, only this time, they were closer. Right outside the tent, he held his breath and listened. The whispers seemed to circle the tent slowly, like someone walking around them. He wanted to wake the others, but he didn't want to make a sound. Suddenly, Emily stirred beside him. "Josh, are you awake?" she whispered. "Yeah," he whispered back. "Do you hear it too?" she asked. He nodded, though she couldn't see him in the dark. A twig snapped. Just feet away from their tent, Josh's heart pounded. He finally shook Ryan and Chloe awake. Ryan, half asleep, muttered, "It's just animals, man. Go back to sleep." But deep down, Josh knew those whispers weren't animals. By daylight, the forest looked almost peaceful again. They tried to laugh about what they'd heard, blaming it on exhaustion or their imaginations. But when they stepped outside the tent, their laughter died. All around their campsite in the dirt, on nearby trees, were small, carved symbols, circles, spirals, strange marks none of them recognized. They hadn't been there the night before. Chloe's face went pale. Who would come out here in the middle of the night, just to do this? Josh didn't have an answer. They debated packing up and leaving, but Ryan convinced them to stay. "Look, it's creepy, yeah, but we drove 3 hours for this. Let's not let some weirdo ruin our weekend." Reluctantly, the others agreed. They spent Saturday hiking deeper into the woods, trying to distract themselves. For a while, it worked. The forest was beautiful in the daylight. Tall pines, golden leaves, streams winding through mossy rocks. But by the time they got back to camp, the uneasy feeling returned. That night, after the fire went out, the whispers came back, louder this time. Clearer. Emily swore she heard her own name being whispered. Ryan said he heard footsteps pacing outside the tent, and then something scratched against the nylon wall of the tent. Slowly, deliberately, Everyone was wide awake now, frozen in silence. The scratching circled the tent, pausing here and there. At one point, a finger or something like it pressed against the fabric from the outside. Dragging slowly along the side, Josh finally snapped. He unzipped the tent and shone his flashlight out into the dark. But there was nothing, just trees, stretching endlessly into the night. By sunrise, they barely slept. When they stumbled out of the tent, their worst fears were confirmed. More symbols, dozens of them, carved into the trees, into the dirt, even into their cooler lid. Someone, or something, had been there again. That was it. They were done. They packed up their gear in record time, shoving everything into their bags. But when they went to start the hike back, they froze. The trail markers, the painted blazes on the trees, were gone, scraped off. It was as if the forest itself didn't want them to leave. Panic set in fast. They argued about which direction to go. Ryan insisted he knew the way, but after an hour of walking, they realized they were going in circles. The whispers followed them, sometimes close, sometimes distant, always just out of sight. By late afternoon, they were exhausted. Then, through the trees, they spotted something, a wooden cabin, old, rotting, with its roof half caved in. Desperate, they went inside. The air was thick with the smell of mildew. Dust coated everything. On the wall, in black paint, were the same symbols they'd seen carved into the trees, and beneath the symbols, written in shaky handwriting, were 4 words. "We are still here, terrified." They barricaded the cabin door with old furniture and huddled together. The whispers came again, louder than ever, almost like chanting now. At one point, Chloe swore she saw shadows moving outside the cracked window. Tall, thin figures, swaying between the trees. None of them slept. When morning finally came, they forced themselves out of the cabin and stumbled through the forest until they found a dirt road. By some miracle, a park ranger's truck came by, and they flagged him down. When they told him what had happened, he gave them a long, hard look. Then he said, "You kids shouldn't be camping out there. Not in Whispering Pines. People go missing in those woods. A lot of people." Josh asked, "What about the symbols?" The ranger shook his head. "Don't ask about the symbols. Just don't go back." The friends never did go back. But to this day, each of them swears they still hear the whispers, sometimes late at night, when the world is quiet and the air is still. And when they do, they remember that cabin and the words painted on the wall. "We are still here." Asterisk. Number 2, The Vanishing Campers. It was early summer in 2011 when my 2 college friends, Jared and Kyle, invited me for a camping trip deep in the forests of Northern California. We'd all just finished finals and wanted nothing more than to disappear into the wilderness for a few days. We picked a spot near Trinity National Forest, about 3 hours from the nearest small town. Jared had heard about a hidden trail where hardly anyone went, perfect for peace, stargazing, and campfires. We left on a Friday morning, laughing, blasting music, and feeling invincible like only 20-year-olds can. We hiked in for about 2 hours with heavy backpacks, eventually finding a small clearing to set up our tents. That first night was perfect. We cooked hot dogs, told stupid stories, and passed around a cheap bottle of whiskey. The forest around us was alive. Owls hooted, the wind rustled leaves, and in the distance, we thought we heard coyotes. Nothing unusual. But the second night, everything changed. It was around 1 a.m. when Kyle shook me awake. "Do you hear that?" he whispered. I sat up, rubbing my eyes. At first, I thought it was just the forest. But then I noticed it. Voices. They were faint, but clear, at least 2 people speaking. Not laughing or shouting like hikers, but whispering, low, hushed, and almost deliberate. We froze, listening. The voices moved around our camp in slow circles, just beyond the reach of our flashlights. Jared unzipped his tent and hissed, "Who the hell is out there?" The whispering stopped instantly. The silence that followed was worse than the voices. We sat awake for hours, clutching knives and flashlights, but eventually, exhaustion won. By morning, everything seemed normal. We brushed it off as probably just hunters and tried to enjoy the day. That evening, though, things escalated. As we cooked dinner, Jared noticed something in the trees. Carved into the bark was a large X, fresh, the wood pale and splintered. Another tree had a circle carved into it. Another had what looked like tally marks. "Dude, this wasn't here yesterday," Kyle said, his face pale. We tried to laugh it off, but unease settled in. That night, the voices returned, but this time, closer. I swear I heard someone whisper my name. Around 3 a.m., Jared snapped. He grabbed a flashlight and stormed toward the trees. "Enough. Show yourselves," he shouted. The light cut through the darkness, and for a split second, we saw movement. Two shadowy figures ducking behind a tree, then silence again. We barely slept. By morning, Jared was missing. His tent was still zipped shut, his boots still inside, but Jared himself was gone. We tore through the woods screaming his name for hours. No footprints, no sign of struggle. He was just gone. Kyle wanted to hike out immediately. I agreed. We packed frantically and headed toward the trail. But as we walked, something dawned on us. The forest was different. Trees we didn't recognize. Streams that weren't on the map. It was like the trail had shifted overnight. At one point, Kyle swore he saw Jared ahead, just standing between the trees, watching us. He sprinted toward him, but when I caught up, there was nothing there. We were hopelessly lost. By nightfall, we had no choice but to set up camp again. That's when the whispering returned, louder than ever, circling, overlapping, almost like chanting. I covered my ears, shaking. Kyle stared into the trees and whispered, "They want us." That was the last thing he said before he walked into the forest, flashlight in hand. I screamed his name, but he didn't turn back. His light bobbed deeper into the woods until it vanished. I stumbled out 2 days later, dehydrated, delirious, and alone. Search and rescue never found Jared or Kyle. The only evidence was in my phone, a single recording I'd taken of the voices that second night. When the rescuers played it back, their faces drained of color. The whispers were faint, but you could make out a single phrase, repeated over and over, in a language none of us spoke. One word, though, was clear, whispered between the others: "Stay." Story number 3, The Watcher in the Trees. Back in 1997, my uncle worked as a fire lookout in the forests of Montana. It was a lonely job, but he loved the quiet, long shifts, sitting in a wooden tower, watching the horizon for smoke. The lookout tower was 40 feet tall, accessible only by a narrow ladder. It gave a perfect 360-degree view of endless trees. One evening, in late August, while scanning the forest with his binoculars, he noticed something odd. Far below, maybe 200 yards away, stood a man. At first he thought it was a lost hiker, but the man wasn't moving, just staring up at the tower. My uncle waved, but got no response. Eventually, the man stepped backward into the shadows of the trees and vanished. Unsettling, but not terrifying. Not yet. The next night, around midnight, my uncle awoke to the sound of footsteps on the ladder. Slow, deliberate. One step at a time, heart pounding. He grabbed his flashlight and shone it down. The ladder was empty, but the footsteps continued, climbing higher, until they stopped directly beneath the trapdoor. He held his breath, listening. For what felt like an eternity, something stood just inches below him. Then, silence. When he finally opened the trapdoor, there was nothing but the empty ladder swaying in the wind. Over the next week, the sightings escalated. The man appeared almost every evening at different distances, sometimes at the tree line, sometimes closer, always staring, always silent. One night, my uncle tried shouting, "Who are you? What do you want?" The man tilted his head, then took a step closer. That was the only time my uncle saw his face, pale, gaunt, with eyes so dark they almost looked hollow. Then he melted back into the forest. The final night, my uncle was awakened again by footsteps on the ladder, but this time they were fast, frantic, almost running. He grabbed his rifle, aimed at the trapdoor, and waited. The steps reached the top, then stopped. Silence. Suddenly, the trapdoor shook violently, as if someone was trying to force it open. My uncle fired a single shot through the wood. The shaking stopped instantly. When he opened the door at sunrise, there was no blood, no body, just claw marks dug deep into the wood. He quit the job the next day. Even now, when he tells the story, he swears the man wasn't human.